If you have ever thought I would practice more if I could just afford better tools, this is for you. Because there is a pressure in spiritual spaces to upgrade. A better deck, nicer incense, a prettier altar, a course, a workshop, a retreat. And if your budget is tight, it can start to feel like you're behind, like everyone else is deepening and you're just making do. But spiritual depth has never depended on disposable income. It just looks impressive when it does. This isn't about shaming people who buy beautiful things. It's about separating devotion from consumption. Buying something can support your practice, but it does not replace it. Money is a constraint, just like space and visibility. If your financial margin is small, your practice will look different. That's economics, and economics are not a moral measure of your spirituality. But let's be a little bit more concrete. What is actually free? Breath. The way you inhale and exhale on purpose. Attention. Undivided, focused presence. Repetition, doing the same small thing again and again until it becomes embodied. Prayer spoken, even if it's just one sentence. Meditation without an app or timer. Walking with intention instead of scrolling, or even combining them as a walking meditation. Sitting in sunlight for 5 deliberate minutes, collecting rainwater in a jar when it just happens to rain. A stone you find outside and decide is meaningful, a leaf that catches your attention, a fallen branch that becomes a wand because you say it is. That's actually one of my favorite things to do. This is a tiny wand, but this is a little branch that I made my wand. All that is free, and more importantly, it's foundational. You do not need to purchase access to the elements. They are already here. And when you start working with what is already here, you notice what's available instead of what's missing. That mindset alone can deepen your spirituality. There are also things that are extremely cheap but effective. Salt from your kitchen, tap water, a single tea light instead of a large ritual candle, basic unscented candles instead of specialty ones, a simple notebook instead of a leather-bound journal, a pen you already own, reusable jars from pasta sauce or jam, and tea bags. Tea bags are one of the most underrated tools. Peppermint, green tea, black tea, hibiscus. They are inexpensive, portioned, and widely available. You can cut them open and use small amounts in sachets, jars, floor washes, offerings, as a dressing for the tiny tea candle, tea light. You can steep them intentionally and use the water for cleansing, blessing, or devotional rituals. If you can afford a 2 to 3 euro box of tea, you suddenly have multiple herbal applications. You can also make things yourself. Simple oil blends using olive oil and dried herbs. Handwritten sigils instead of printed art. Draw your own symbols. Use brown paper from packaging for petitions. Dry orange peels instead of buying special incense. And if you cook, you also have access to some spices, right? Cinnamon, bay leaves, rosemary. That's a full shelf of herbs hiding in your kitchen that you can repurpose. Libraries are another resource people sometimes forget. You don't have to buy every book, borrow, take notes, return. The depth comes from integration, not ownership. If you can't buy 5 decks, you don't need 5 decks. Learn just the one deck you have access to deeply. If you only have one candle, use it intentionally until it's gone. You can just repurpose it for different spells. No one can tell you how to do that. The depth comes from returning to it over and over. There's also something important here about discipline. When money is limited, you're forced to ask, do I want this because it supports my practice or because it looks good in spiritual places, it looks good online? This question alone builds discernment. And discernment is part of spiritual maturity. There's a difference between investing and impulse buying. If you save intentionally for one meaningful tool you will use for years, that's different from constantly upgrading because you feel behind. Sometimes buying becomes a substitute for sitting with discomfort. It feels productive, it feels like movement, but real progress is often repetition. I can say that because I have been there. There is something steadying, knowing your practice doesn't collapse when your budget tightens. If you can practice with breath and focus alone, your connection isn't fragile. And if this kind of grounded, realistic spirituality resonates with you, you could subscribe. That's what this channel is about, working with real life instead of fantasy setups. And in the next part, we will talk about energy, what happens when you're simply too tired. But I will see you in the next one.